give you a heads up, like 10 seconds.
Is he in the booth?
They've gone live now,
Uh-huh.
so you can start, but you can see
Yeah, well, there's a couple of minutes, so
just wait till
just
smile, wait till everyone's ready.
Mhm. Yeah. Please do. Yeah, we're on a remote connection, virtual, with the rest of the world. Okay, well, I think it is just 5:30 here in Perth, so we'll make a start. So welcome, everyone, and we're here physically in the engineering department at the University of Western Australia, but we're joined virtually with people all around the world. So a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you may be around the world. I think the first thing to do, and people who are Australian or live in Australia will know that it's traditional that we do a welcome to country, and I've been asked to do that. For people outside Australia, this is a traditional thing that we do. We recognize the traditional owners and custodians of the land where we are situated, and for the University of Western Australia, the indigenous group, the traditional custodians, are the Whadjuk Noongar people, and on their behalf I welcome you. I'd like to pay my respects to them, to the culture, to the communities, and to the elders past and present. So thank you to the Whadjuk Noongar people for welcoming us here tonight. Secondly, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along to the inauguration of our new president. And I'm delighted we have quite a number of people here in the audience tonight, and I know a larger number worldwide. It's been a funny year in many respects. Maybe funny is the wrong adjective, but it's been a challenging year with COVID, and it has meant the reset of lots of things that we've had to do. But there's a silver lining to most clouds, and certainly with regard to virtual meetings, these have been a success, and the institution has shown its flexibility in amending the way we've done the business. And I think, in fact, we have made a great success out of many meetings where attendance has actually gone up because people have been able to tune in virtually, as opposed to times when the meetings have been purely physical and people have been able to get there. So I congratulate the institution for that. It is also a tradition that the former president should introduce and welcome the new president to give the inauguration address. So what I would like to do now is call on our now immediate past president, Stephen Richardson, to introduce Jane and say a few words. So, Stephen, I hope you're there, and over to you.
Hello, I'm Stephen Richardson, and indeed until yesterday I was president. My predecessor, Ken Rivers, handed the chains of office to me. And despite COVID, those 18 months have passed extraordinarily quickly. And to my mind, there have been some significant milestones during that period. And let me say that all of these milestones are due to the work of others, members and staff within IChemE, and I'm hugely grateful to them. And though it seems to be three big ones, one around climate change and our position statement, which came out in November last year, and now we're moving from words to actions, how we actually assist members of the institution in their day-to-day work to be more sustainable. And that has been greatly assisted by a very generous donation from a past president, Ian Shott. Second has been the major overhaul of our qualifications process. We now have streamlined processes, which should make the whole thing much more welcoming, appealing, and easy to follow. And that's particularly important for those with non-standard qualifications. And the final bit, and as important as the other two, is the morphing of what's called regions into member engagement. We're less concerned about geography and more about actually supporting and serving members. And I think we can expect some big and significant improvements there in the near future. But I realise you're not here to listen to me talking about the past. You're here to listen to Jane talking about the future. Jane is IChemE's 80th president. She is the second elected president. I was the first, but nobody actually stood against me. So Jane is the first one who has stood against other people and been elected. And Jane is also the third female president of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. Before her, there were Julia Higgins and Judith Hackett. And the alert amongst you will notice that all three have first names that begin with the letter J, something to think about there. Jane has had 1 year as deputy president of IChemE, and before that a period on Congress as vice chair. And recently she's held a few jobs there, president or vice president of various LNG related activities for Woodside, CEO of what seems to be called NOPSEMA, which is an acronym which is to do with the Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environmental Management in Australia. And most recently, she's been a consultant for the World Bank on zero routine flaring. And now, and with that, it is my great pleasure to invite Jane to give her presidential address. Jane.
Thank you, Stephen, for that terrific introduction. Before I begin my address, I'd like to consider safety for a moment. And for those of you not familiar with the concept of a safety share or safety moment, this is something that's quite common in oil and gas, in some engineering consultancies, in ports, in other organisations. 35 years ago, on the 2nd of November 1986, on the West Kingfish platform, 2 engineers were conducting routine tests on oil recovery equipment. Without warning, backflow up the open drain system filled the work area with hydrocarbons. Hot exhaust from the mole pumps ignited the hydrocarbons. Both engineers were engulfed with flames. Mark Crossley ran along a walkway and leapt into the water. Jacqueline James ran to find a safety shower. Another engineer smothered the flames, led her to a shower. A substantial portion of her body was severely burned. The aftermath, a Victoria Police investigation, a coroner's finding in October 87 that Mark Crossley died by drowning. In March 88, the Australian Federal Police, the AFP, commenced an investigation. In January 1991, quite a long time afterwards, SO pleaded guilty. Failure to secure health and safety welfare of persons. Failure to maintain in good condition and repair the firefighting deluge system. Failure to maintain in good condition and repair the vent the flare. They were fined $15,000 in total. And then they spent a whole heap of money upgrading the drains. So what are the lessons, the safety lessons that we can take with us? Well, first of all, the design was not inherently safe. When you have open deck drains and closed equipment drains emptying into the same system, backflow from one to the other is possible. A vent system blockage being overpressured, which then led to the backflow because of the interconnection. Irony, safety equipment, the flame arrestor, was a critical issue. The flame arrestor was on the P&IDs, but not included in any maintenance or inspection programs. Don't install stuff if you're not going to maintain it. The test design did not have any way of those involved stopping the test if there were concerns. The chain of command for engineers undertaking the test probably wasn't clear enough. The most senior engineer was a contractor, so had technical responsibility being outsourced appropriately. There was no provision for oral or visual communication in a high noise area, and the test team were not advised of shower locations, the danger of jumping overboard, or even how to jump safely. With the benefit of hindsight, legal argument prevented the sharing of these lessons, which is why I speak of them today. So thank you. I will now move to my presidential address. I deem it a special honour and privilege to have this opportunity to serve this great institution, our IChemE, and I accept this honour with humility. As already been pointed out, I'm proud to be the 80th president and the third female, and I note with some satisfaction that the time between female presidents is decreasing. It's particularly satisfying to lead our institution into our second centenary year as the first president who was actually voted by a popular vote of the members. As I've not had time to personally meet many of you, the first part of my address will be a reflection on aspects of my professional journey and will highlight some of the changes that shaped me and other chemical engineers and our profession. The second part of my address will touch on challenges and opportunities facing IChemE as we approach our 100-year anniversary of our founding and continue to deliver on our goals set out in our strategy 2024. My approach to my presidential year is an opportunity for IChemE to reflect, review, reinforce and re-energise in times of change, challenge and opportunity, and after 100 years to answer the question, is IChemE relevant in changing times? Only yesterday, members voted to update the inspiring words that are set out in our institution's objects in our Royal Charter. These amendments will ensure that IChemE remains relevant, contemporary and aligned with its Royal Charter. Support for these amendments has already been given by Engineering Council. They will be now submitted to the Privy Council Office to obtain final approval from Her Majesty the Queen. The amended objects will reflect that IChemE has broadened its portfolio of activities since its original Royal Charter in 1957, particularly in areas such as process safety. The amendments will also ensure that the objects clearly reflect the role of chemical engineers in addressing global challenges, especially sustainability, and promote responsible and sustainable action that is both collective and enduring. I graduated with a Bachelor of Chemical and Materials Engineering from Auckland University in an era of bad hair and poor fashion. This is more or less our final professional year, and yes, there are not many of us. And yes, there is only one female. But more important than what you see in the picture is that our collaboration, cooperation, and mutual support. We worked as a team, and I'm deeply appreciative. To put our chemical engineering year group into context, of the 200 engineers who graduated across all engineering disciplines at Auckland University that year, only 3, or 1.5%, were female. Today, most chemical engineering programs consistently have over 26% female participation. I guess as a profession, at least in the universities, we've come a long way. The trend in numbers is also clear. This UK data is also reflected in other countries, with universities producing many more chemical engineers, along with many more graduates across most disciplines. Positive and supportive opportunities for graduates, ideally as part of a graduate program, are essential to the future of our profession. I'm not confident that the trends in graduate opportunities have followed the growth in graduates that lag these numbers by 4 or 5 years. My understanding is that many companies have cut back on their graduate intakes this year, but this may be a somewhat limited view from here in Western Australia, and it may be different elsewhere. I am concerned that it will be harder than usual for many graduates to gain an employment that uses and values their chemical engineering degree, that has taken some significant personal commitment of time, talent and treasure, because university education is no longer essentially free. Availability of graduate jobs varies each year, so part of the answer may reveal itself in smaller organisations realising the value of the skills embedded in a chemical engineer and take on graduates. But there is a difference between a job for a graduate, where the goal is to get the work done, and a position in a graduate program that seeks to develop professional skills, judgment, decision-making alongside getting a job done. Smaller organisations are less likely to have the resources to offer the experience and training of a graduate program, and there may be opportunities for IChemE to bridge this gap. As a graduate, I moved to Australia and joined an oil and gas company who offered a great graduate program and, as I discovered later, were a leader in recruitment of female engineers. Occasionally, they fell short of their aspiration to provide a supportive work environment for all engineers, but their intentions were good. They responded to feedback and were heading in a positive direction. This picture shows some of the norms of the time that are no longer acceptable. Personal protective equipment. Today, hearing protection, eye protection, gloves are mandatory. Coveralls and jackets are high-vis, these weren't despite the black and white, with reflective panels. Today, there is almost no manual handling. Technology has taken over the hard physical work, but the physics and geology of drilling have not changed. Analog gauges have been replaced by a myriad of screens, lights, digital information. More data, but the physics of the system are the same. Lifelong learning is a personal credo. Here in IChemE, we call it many things, including initial professional development and continuous professional development. It's embedded in the DNA of our special interest groups and member groups. Professional development is an ongoing journey. Becoming qualified or getting chartered marks a level of achievement, not the end destination. My journey has taken me from my chemical engineering qualifications and experience to a Master of Environmental Studies from Tasmania, a Master of Business Administration from Heriot-Watt University, and AICD's Company Directors course, along with numerous professional leadership and management short courses along the way. Paralleling my learning journey have been career moves from the oil and gas sector to a self-employed consultant, back to oil and gas and resources and mining more generally, out to superannuation, otherwise known as pension funds, and back to oil and gas before becoming CEO of the National Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environmental Management Authority, known as NOPSEMA for short, and I'm now an independent director. Early in my career, I was active in IChemE and other professional bodies, but unfortunately, due to time, job changes, relocations and circumstances, my enthusiasm and memberships both lapsed. Since rejoining IChemE, I've wondered whether my enthusiasm and contribution would have continued longer if I was earlier in my career today. Member opportunities today are not constrained by geography, thanks to technology and some of the changes accelerated by COVID. IChemE has taken rapid steps towards its goal of being an institution servicing its membership 365 days a year, either directly or through its partners, as long as you can get internet connection at a decent speed. Technology enables today's member to participate in a number of member groups or special interest groups to find one or more where they feel that they belong. Members who live away from the major IChemE population centres can enjoy the opportunities offered by IChemE and contribute as a volunteer more easily than ever. Our member communications folk will continue to publicise events, activities organised by member groups, branches, special interest groups, which are open to all members. Early in my career, I didn't really appreciate the significance of a chartered qualification. It provides recognition that you've satisfied your assessors at independent review, that you're able to perform your duties in a professional, skilled and diligent manner. In many countries, the engineering profession is self-regulated, i.e. not underpinned by statute, and the lack of statute in particular relating to protection of engineering title means that any person who carries out an activity somewhat associated with engineering occupations may call themselves an engineer, regardless of their education or verifiable level of skill. Those who join a professional body and submit themselves for professional competence assessment by their peers and subject themselves to a code of ethical conduct are setting themselves apart. The commitment includes ensuring that they only practice in areas where they're competent, and they will ensure that they maintain their competence on an ongoing basis, the CPD. So in summary, any person can say they're an engineer, but only professionals go the extra mile and make a public commitment to uphold professional standards of competence and ethical conduct. These individuals deserve to be recognised with a chartered status. Whilst change is a hallmark of every aspect of our society and the environment where chemical engineers work, there are three particular areas that I'd like to focus on today with a note of caution: technology, systems thinking and regulation. Technology has become the key enabler for society. The technology that chemical engineers use to do their work has changed significantly. The slide rule in this photo was used more than once during my time at university, and let's just say that any relief brought by the advent of computers was short-lived. The mark sense or punch cards neatly held together by a rubber band were taken to the computer centre in the afternoon, only to collect the printout the following morning. Invariably, there was an error, so it hadn't run. Becoming a graduate and starting at my first job were the delights of an IBM terminal on a desk linked by wires back to its brain in the form of a mainframe computer. Sounds a bit like the cloud linked by... Anyway, since then we've all become familiar with the myriad of devices, softwares, apps that are intended to make our lives as engineers more straightforward. As technology becomes more sophisticated, it brings with it risk as well as tremendous upside, as we're able to shift our time and effort from handling data and calculations to generating information and drawing insights to inform decision making. Innovation has given us fabulous tools. They can also mask our understanding of what's really going on. If bad things can happen when technology fails or is compromised by cyber criminals, backup systems must function in time to prevent disaster. In high-tempo flight operations on a sophisticated modern aircraft carrier, there's a consistent flow of information. Every safety-critical activity is monitored. Layers of protection are designed to ensure that any safety-critical activity that is out of place will be noticed by someone before it causes problems. Visual checks and cross-checks by human spotters provide the final assurance before the command to land or take off. Advanced technology monitors the status and location of all aircraft on the deck and in the hangar below. Fail-safe redundancy comes in the form of a physical model, watched and kept up to date by a team of people in real time in case technology fails. As chemical engineers, our thinking is continually evolving. In his presidential address, our immediate past president, Stephen Richardson, highlighted the importance of system thinking. Before system thinking, there was a collection of knowledge, but without a connecting framework. Elements of process safety were being taught as a range of techniques, but with no overarching scheme pre-74 and pre-Flixborough, which is often thought of the birth of process safety. The Flixborough disaster was immediately followed by the Health and Safety at Work Act, which led to a sea change in thinking and a new regulator, the Health and Safety Executive, and the systematising of safety regulation. And of course, what happened in the UK was brought over here as well. Different names though. The result of Flixborough and the HSE was that chemical engineers got into system thinking early because they had to. IChemE got on board quickly too. Others can do system thinking, electrical engineers and computing engineers amongst them, but the question is, what is the system that they consider? The boundary of a computer system or electrical network is fairly easy to define. As a result of chemical engineers getting it wrong, affect much more than just their plant, but also everyone and everything close by, they simply had to think bigger. Now that we need to address climate change and sustainability, we have to think very big indeed. And these systems will almost certainly get even bigger as governments, insurers, and the general public take more interest in what companies do and what they will permit. Concerns about finite resources prompted the development of concepts and tools such as life cycle analysis, which will become increasingly important. But life cycle analysis is tricky, and to do it well involves correctly defining the boundaries of the system and relevant, not theoretical data inputs. My note of caution here is to think big enough and not just blindly follow the book. Expanding community and government expectations beyond the boundaries of the immediate activity is shifting expectations that companies and organisations consider their contribution to 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, in addition to their contribution to climate change emissions directly linked to climate change. To remain relevant, chemical engineers need to expand their thinking beyond the immediate business case for emissions reduction or opportunities to improve resource and energy efficiency and those involving water conservation. Whilst it can be difficult to make a commercial business case for activities that contribute to the remainder of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, chemical engineers need the skills to consider and contribute to decisions. Governments will step in and make the case through legislation where companies are not acting quick enough. So IChemE has a vital role to play in developing skills and knowledge of members to help bridge any gaps. Thanks to a very generous donation from Ian Schott, a past president of the institution, a project has commenced to build our sustainability skills and knowledge. Regulators and regulations are also evolving. Unfortunately, change to regulators and regulations are usually written in blood. There's an unwritten change process initiated by a major accident, followed by an inquiry which usually reaffirms there are no new accidents, only repeats of prior accidents unravelling in a slightly different way. Recommendations usually point to a series of failings by the operator, flaws in the regulations, and a regulator who had insufficient power, expertise, or resources to regulate risk and keep the operator in check. The end result is invariably restructure for the regulator and/or new strengthened regulations. For example, Lord Cullen's report into Piper Alpha highlighted the weaknesses of prescriptive or rules-based regulatory regime of the time. To be effective, rules in a prescriptive regime must be both sufficient, correct, up to date and enforced. And Lord Cullen highlighted the responsibility for that risk and maintaining safety should be with those best placed to manage the risk, the operator of the facility. The role of the regulator was to provide assurance to governments and the community that the operator was doing what they said they would to manage risk to as low as reasonably practical. Lord Cullen's key recommendations triggered an evolution of safety regulation, from prescriptive or rules-based, where the regulator sets the standards for operators, to goal setting, where the regulator establishes level of risk, often as low as reasonably practical or a LARP. Regulation governing well integrity, environment management generally remained compartmentalised and more prescriptive. Some jurisdictions like Australia followed the goal-setting model with regulatory effort focused on developing a risk or hazard management framework, a requirement to make a safety case to the regulator, a competent and independent regulator, workforce involvement, and a general duty of care imposed on the operator to maintain safe systems of work. However, these events were not sufficient to prevent further major accident events. In the case of the Montara oil spill and subsequent fire in Northern Australia, a key cause was loss of well integrity, which at the time fell under a different legislation and different regulator to the safety of the facility. The Montara oil spill, which continued for 75 days and subsequent fire, resulted in the West Atlas drill rig melting over the Montara wellhead platform. Fortunately, no one was injured, but had circumstances been slightly different, the outcome may have been catastrophic. As expected, the pattern repeated. Following the Montara inquiry, well integrity, environmental management of the offshore industry became the responsibility of the federal government's safety regulator. NOPSA was renamed NOPSEMA. New regulations were now goal setting for both well integrity and environmental management. Operators now had to make the case that risks to well integrity were as low as reasonably practical, and actionable plans were in place to respond in the event of emergency. For the environment, a two-tier test was applied. Impacts to the environment had to be acceptable, and the risk to the environment had to be as low as reasonably practical. But in practice, the regulator remained internally siloed, with specialists focusing on safety, environmental management, and for drilling operations, well integrity. 5 years later, experience has shown there may be a better way. NOPSEMA has stated that it's moving to integrated regulation. It's notable that this was not triggered by a major accident, but by the regulator seeking both better regulatory outcomes and reduced risk. Integrated regulation aims to consider a broader set of risk factors, an asset or activity-based approach that incorporates the expertise of specialists in occupational health and safety, environmental management, well integrity, oil spill risk. This holistic approach to compliance monitoring should allow better targeting of the most pressing risks and provide inspectors with a fuller picture of compliance issues to further enhance regulatory outcomes. This is an example of a regulator, in this case NOPSEMA, adopting system thinking to drive better regulatory outcomes. If successful, I'm sure this model will be followed by others. So back to chemical engineers. What we do is help large and not so large companies and organisations solve difficult problems. Our system thinking is a powerful tool if we apply it to the right system. In the words of Roland Clift, chemical engineers need to be able to work under uncertainty, to take decisions despite incomplete data. Our focus should be to design the reactor or the facility that is resistant to both short and long-term change within the system. Chemical engineers should identify and communicate the answer that is least likely to be wrong over the life of the decision, given the range of uncertainty about the future. So turning now to IChemE as we approach our 100-year celebration. First, let me acknowledge the challenges the global community has faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Whilst our experience of COVID has been very different depending on where we are, we've been united by concern, fear and apprehension as the disease impacted communities across the globe. Whilst our experience may differ, agility, resilience and trust have served IChemE and each of us individually. Looking back, had IChemE not invested heavily in IT systems over recent years, our ability to pivot to digital delivery of services to members and remote working would not have been possible. I've chosen to deliver my presidential address live here in Perth, where distance, space and hard borders have protected us so far from the worst of the pandemic, to send a message that there are opportunities to do things differently as we adapt to a new normal. We don't have to revert to the past. Even the presidential address can be done outside London or Rugby. So strategically, the way forward for IChemE is following the roadmap set out in Strategy 2024. We've already made significant progress towards our vision, led by members, supporting members, serving society. Our Board of Trustees, including the President, is now elected by members and has the responsibility and powers to lead the organisation. Therefore, we're led by members. As a result, we likely will not please all of the members all of the time, as our remit is to act in the interests of the organisation and the membership as a whole, and not in the interests of individual members or subgroups. We've made significant steps towards delivering value and supporting members through a digitally connected institution, Digital IChemE, which allowed us to support members through COVID-19. This work has already resulted in the Loss Prevention Bulletin being made available to all members free of charge. Our Knowledge Hub, the new application portal, have been launched, and with more to come to enhance our individual case procedure and other core services. In our mission to serve society, such a critical part of our Royal Charter, our Learned Society has selected 3 priority topics: responsible production, major hazards management and digitalisation. Initiatives in these areas are ongoing to meet the targets set by the close of 2024. Following the launch of IChemE's position on climate change in 2020, a key deliverable includes climate change action plans specific for industry sectors and technologies, which are being developed by the institution's special interest groups and coordinated by the Learned Society Committee. Looking at how we achieve our aims and objectives, I want to refer to IChemE's Strategy 2024, which is our roadmap. As you are aware, the strategy launched in 2019 has 4 main aims which align our activity. We'll realise our vision when we achieve these aims. We are respected for our professionalism and technical competence. We are recognised as a vibrant learned society that materially impacts on the global grand challenges. We're acknowledged as a peer group leader in which an engaged membership receives and adds value. We're known as a high-performing organisation delivering significant value. Significant progress has been made over the last 2 years, with realignments made where necessary, but I'm very much looking forward to overseeing continued progress towards our goal. However, what might prevent us from achieving our goal? Let us pause and reflect on the risks to IChemE, both to the implementation of Strategy 2024 and to the long-term sustainability of the institution. There's a tendency in this sort of presentation to focus on the bright future, but as a former regulator, I tend to go back to risk. Some might say once a regulator, always a regulator. We must be alert and keep our eyes on the ball. Should members or the wider community no longer value our chartered status, IChemE would experience increases in members leaving, decreases in members joining, and the start of a slide to becoming a competitor of online education providers rather than a professional engineering institution. We have a challenge to keep members happy, but not at the expense of the institution and collective membership. Across our 33,000 plus membership, there are diverse interests, and increasing calls to speak out on this contribute to that. But IChemE has limited resources, and we must use the time, talent and treasure of our members wisely. I encourage those who are passionate about pushing IChemE to become an advocate for their area of interest to consider whether IChemE getting involved will influence the outcome. Or would we simply be talking for the sake of talking? More concisely, should IChemE focus on our relatively limited sphere of influence rather than our broader sphere of interests? I think we need to focus on action versus words. And my general focus for the institution during my presidency is strongly aligned to my predecessors. Let's celebrate our centenary in 2022 as we work better together to prepare for the next 100 years. I'd like to see us continuing to value members' membership and chartered status so that non-members say, why not IChemE? We must recognise our contribution to society, continue to be a leading voice in process safety, and offer more support to provide skills and knowledge to equip members to contribute to the challenges of climate change and sustainability so that IChemE remains relevant. But how we work is important. Working better together is essential. So there's three things that I will focus on. Ethics. Our development of chemical engineers includes a strong focus on technical competence. While ethical issues are increasingly discussed during education and training, there is scope for more discussion at all points during our professional journey around judgment, ethical decision-making, dealing with uncertainty, and how we engage with society. Embedding ethical culture in the chemical engineering profession would embrace other important professional behaviours, such as operating sustainably, inclusively, with regard for diverse views. Greater visibility of an ethical engineering culture to the whole of society would help us ensure that engineers retain society's trust. There are opportunities and challenges of representing a diverse community with differing views. The loudest voice is not always the one that's listened to, and we all need to respect decisions through elected officers as member-led. And IChemE seeks equality, diversity, and always inclusivity. But this means different things to different people. So we actually need to work together to help each other understand the needs of others and accept that IChemE may not be able to meet everyone's expectations. We each have a responsibility to throw the rope down, to help others join in, to ensure participants have an opportunity to contribute, to think broadly when putting forward names. We should put all opportunities on the volunteer page on the website, encourage others to view it and put themselves forward. Renewal is critical, and perhaps some of those who've held positions on the same committee for a long time might consider letting go and trying something new when their term is complete, allowing room for other members to step up, step in and fill their place. As we contemplate our first 100 years and preparing for the next, I thought I would share the ethos that's embedded in the President's medallion. The crest on the medallion is the original seal of the institution dating back to 1923. It was designed by Edith Hinchley, who was the wife of J.W. Hinchley, one of the founders. It represents the emblematic watering of the tree of knowledge from the fountains of chemistry and engineering. For an audience of engineers back in 1929, Hinchley was explicit about the engineering connections. He said, chemical engineering is that branch of engineering which is concerned with the process plant in which chemical or physical changes are the principal features. A chemical engineer is therefore essentially an engineer with a knowledge of fundamental science and a special knowledge and experience of those processes which are carried out on a large scale in the manufacture of chemical and technical products. Since these processes cannot be carried out unless a commercial profit is obtained, the chemical engineer must have a knowledge of industrial economics and factory management. I think if he was speaking today, I suspect he would explain that since these processes are not carried out in a vacuum, an engineer must possess a knowledge of system thinking, process safety, and life cycle analysis. So I started preparing my address with a question: is IChemE still relevant? Expectations of government and communities for professionals to have and adhere to professional standards are increasing. IChemE's role as the internationally recognised qualifying body and learned society for chemical, biochemical and process engineers is more important than ever, especially when things go wrong. The IChemE community provides an opportunity to access and contribute to expertise, resources and international reach of IChemE's members and staff who are working together to set and uphold professional standards that underpin our qualifications, which in turn protect the public. Done well, this will help attract, develop and mentor the next generation of chemical engineers. We're working together to share specialist knowledge and good practice to support continuous personal and professional development and help advance the future of the profession. We're about facilitating networking opportunities between members from both inside and outside our own sector and our own geographic location. And we're providing opportunities for members to contribute and to help shape our response to the global grand challenges and advance the contribution of chemical engineering for the benefit of society. IChemE is relevant in times of change. And as your president, I'll be working to ensure that IChemE continues to adapt and respond to the opportunities and challenges presented by our changing world. However, even as president, there is only so much that I can influence. Working together as the IChemE community, we can achieve much more. Let's all communicate the value and benefits and relevance of IChemE to colleagues, employers and our networks. And as a result, employers may value membership and chartered status. Non-members may join and current members may get more from their membership and consider volunteering. So in closing, I'd just like to say thank you to the UWA for generously contributing their EZONE for the evening, the WA members group for supporting the event, to Lucy, Bev and Fiona, based in Rugby and in Melbourne. Thank you for organising and supporting all the AV and the online video streaming. And finally, I'd like to thank and acknowledge the support of my family, especially my husband Brent, my two children, Avla and Aaron. Aaron's here tonight. Friends, colleagues, and those who've helped me along the way. Without your support, I would not be here. So please, keep in touch. Don't expect an instant response, but I will get around to responding as soon as I've either got the answer if it's complicated, because I'll have to go and get help, or when I've had time to think and provide an appropriate response. So thank you for listening.
Jen, I think we should thank you for a very interesting, thought-provoking and challenging presidential address. I won't try and summarise all these excellent points, and I hope it's made available to us all online. But if I may just pick out a few things that you touched on. It was very interesting to learn about your involvement with IChemE as a young graduate, and the way you continued but lapsed, but then came back and have contributed. I actually recognise a bit of that myself. It was very instructive the way you picked out that the fact that qualifications are extremely important, but it's something which is to be built on, and lifelong learning is absolutely critical. So qualifications, yes, experience, continued learning through career, and building that knowledge that you talked about. I also noted that you talked about the importance for engineers to value professional regulation, and I think that is extremely important. When you think of other professional bodies, medical bodies, etc., you don't get someone who's loosely associated with the medical fraternity calling themselves doctors. Yeah, so I think that we really need the underpinning of professional chemical engineering chartership to assist us in society. You talked about your change agenda. You highlighted technology, and you also highlighted the risks of technology, which is important. But if ever we need a lesson in the application of technology, it's been in the last year. And I only hope, and I know your passion for technology, that you will continue to apply technology for continuous improvement in the institution. We don't just go back to normal, we actually progress and build on that. Systems thinking, there's sometimes some fuzzy interpretation of what systems thinking is all about. Your examples from the major incidents in the offshore business and Flixborough are very apposite. But if anybody does need some thoughts about system thinking, what we've been through with COVID in the last year, where we really need to join up medical science, modelling, mathematical modelling, epidemiology, economics and politics, then that is, I think, a great example of where we haven't done it very well, I think. Interesting point about you as a regulator. Yeah, I think maybe some of the most worrying phrases, well, I'm from government or I'm from the regulator and I'm here to help you. It used to throw people into a mild panic and a lot of resistance. And the point you make that regulators and the role of the regulator is more about helping to change the process, develop policy, is equally as important as the investigation of the incident. You talked about uncertainty, and I think it's quite apposite that here in Western Australia, where is the home of the black swan, we ought to be front and centre of dealing with uncertainty. I liked your points about the future of the profession, and in particular the institution. We have moved a long way in the last few years since we started the whole review of governance some 5-6 years ago. We are now an institution led by members. We have elections, and I just make an appeal to everyone in the room and worldwide to continue the efforts to engage with, in particular, young people, to get them committed to the profession. You then took us through your risk analysis and assessed the strategy for 24. You highlighted your 4 main aims, and we wish you well on that. And of course, finally, we're coming up to a 100-year anniversary, and I think it's great that the institution has survived. It's moved from a kind of archaic Edwardian society of the great and the good into what I hope is today a much more vibrant and professional organisation. Yes, why not ChemEng? And although the numbers of people studying chemical engineering seem to have topped out, I still think it's such a wonderful education process for being able to apply engineering, science and systems thinking to other fields other than the traditional. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you join with me in the room, but worldwide, although we won't be able to hear you, let's join with together and thank Jane and wish her all success for her year.
Thank you, Andrew. And with that, I declare the close of today's proceedings and invite those of you who've been able to be with us today in person to join me for some refreshments. So thank you, everyone.